Recording on its way. So, सबसे पहले I want to ask, how are you? How's life going?
Alhamdulillah, all well. Just busy with my projects and working, and that's about it.
Okay, that's perfect. So now we start the recording. Okay, perfectly. Recording on BA. ठीक है. So, Assalamu alaikum. Hope you all are fine. Today we are with Yasir Tufail. For us, for all of us, Yasir Tufail is not less than a Swadis. A Swadis guy who is a project manager at NASA and working on different things, whether it's related to telescope, whether it's related to communications, whether it's related to space, and whether it's related to stars. But for you, we are here to with him and ask him to introduce himself and tell us who is he and how he's seen and how he sees himself.
Thank you so much, Exa. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. So, as you mentioned, my name is Yasir Tufail. I'm currently working at NASA for almost 17 years. I started working at NASA when I was in college. So, as you mentioned, I worked on various projects. So, one of the biggest projects that I worked on was James Webb Space Telescope. I spent at least 7 years working on that mission. So, I wore different. I wore many hats when I was working on James Webb. So currently, I'm working as a project manager and portfolio manager. One of my project is Tigers. It's actually going to International Space Station, hopefully by next year. And I'm also working as a portfolio manager, supporting other missions as well. So I actually belong to Pakistan. I was born in a very small remote village called Karyanwala. It's actually closer to Gujarat, and moved to US in 2001. I think I was only 15, 16 years old. So I did my basic high school education here. I went to college here, did my bachelor's and master's here. And then while I was in college, I got the opportunity to work on NASA missions. So that's how my NASA journey started.
So I just want to, like, I'm a bit curious, that's why I'm asking. At that moment, was it an internship or just a project or a fellowship? And on which project you were working at that time?
So it's not an it wasn't an internship. It was basically so like a co-op program, meaning I would be trained to actually work on real NASA missions. So it was actually it's called WISE mission. So I think nowadays they call it New WISE. So so that mission was actually Jet Propulsion Laboratory, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory mission. So I was working as a mission system engineer. So my job was to basically the main mission control was actually in at JPL, but they needed a backup mission control far away from JPL, so they chose Maryland NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. So then I was the only one who was trained to actually fly that mission. So basically, if anything happens in JPL where they have to, there's like some sort of like a calamity or something that where they won't be able to actually, let's just say they won't be able to control their satellites, then they have to actually use a different location as a backup location to fly that satellite. So I was actually trained to do that. So that's how I started my journey. And I worked prior to launch and then after launch, even though I graduated, but I still a couple of months kept working on that mission because it was only 6 to 9 months mission. So that's why I had the opportunity to actually go through the entire mission phase. But then later on, I think in Obama's administration, what happened that they revived that mission again. So it started to look for asteroids, like it was like an asteroid hunter. So they called it New Wise. If you guys watch science fiction movies, there's a movie in Netflix called Don't Look Up. So basically, in the beginning, they show like data that there is an asteroid that's actually coming. There's actually a real data that actually came from that satellite I worked on.
Oh, that's cool. So today's session is more about like Artemis. And although as our conversation, I know that you are not highly involved in Artemis, but since you are a project manager on different things at NASA, but as a third person, you just see people working around you on Artemis. So, what you feel about Artemis and how you see Artemis is going? Like for me, for a layman person, who is just interested in science communication, for me, it's Artemis is extended version of Apollo, right? And it was extended because first it was started with Apollo, like people going on moon and exploring it. Now the mission is different. From now the mission is to go to moon and then Mars. But as a third person, when you see people working at NASA on Artemis around you, who is of your field, so how you feel what Artemis is, and how it's going and where it will go.
Yeah. So again, when I was in college, I learned about Apollo missions. So I used to think like I wish I was I was born in the Apollo era. So that was something that I really admired. And now, I mean, circumstances have been changed. I mean, at that time, it was so like politically driven missions. Like we had to go to the moon, and then afterwards, we never went back. Like for more than like 5 decades or something. So now things are different. So basically, we're not just going to the moon, we're actually going to establish a base there. So we will live there. So that means that it's going to be our sort of like a testing ground. So once we're there, we can actually test different environment, different, technologies. So the main purpose is to kind of learn and understand how we can actually live in a hostile environment, where you don't have anything, right? So we need to find out how we could actually just we could find a water that actually can be used as a propellant as well, and also for the human sustainability as well. So we're going to do a lot of these testing. So from my perspective, when I see this, it's a game changer actually, because we're going to actually develop a lot of technologies that have never been tested before. And even though I'm not part of Artemis, but I see like my other coworkers, they're working on different many instruments that will actually eventually go to the moon, and then they will test different things. Not just that, but I think we can also, by using that data and technology, we can improve our life at on Earth as well. We can utilize, that would be like a byproduct of something that actually can be used, on Earth. So any many time when NASA, work on any technology or some sort of like, different telescopes or something, they find their byproducts is always something that we can actually use, on Earth. So my little bit contribution on Artemis was I worked on it's probably going to launch in Artemis 4 or 5, that I worked on the system requirement of the communication. So basically LunaNet. So it's like having internet on the moon. So I worked on the requirements for like a couple of, I think more than like 6 7 months. So that was my little bit contribution towards Artemis. So basically when you are on the moon, let's just say you're working on two different poles, you're like on the other side, and then something happens, you need to communicate with other astronauts, and then you need to communicate people on ground on Earth. So then you need to have some sort of like an internet. So that's what we actually kind of worked on, the kind of requirements that how it's going to be an architecture design and stuff like that. So yeah, it's going to be very challenging, and I'm happy that at least we're going to go stay there. Who knows? Maybe one day you and I or someone else, might be going there, might be living there. So there will be more opportunities.
Definitely, it will have a lot of opportunities. But since you said that you were at the side of like making internet, designing internet, or starting internet for the moon, and that's your role in Artemis. And you also spoke about that how much at times the technology or the things that you discover or the things that you find out on moon or on different planets, it has impacted and beneficially used on Earth as well sometimes. So I want to ask that the internet about which you were talking about, like you worked on it, how that internet could be used to upgrade Earth's internet, or how it can be used further to extend or enhance the communication on Mars if we take it there.
So when I talk about internet, it's just for audience to understand that this is a way of communication. So the way we communicate with satellites and ground, it's very different, because we also need a higher data rate, because we're constantly sending. It's not just communication, but we need to send data as well. So it works differently. So that's why it's not something that that you use it on a daily basis. So that's why it's a little bit different. So the way I call it, it's internet. It's because people could understand that we need some kind of architecture as a communication, so we could actually use to communicate with the folks on ground, and then also astronauts on the moon. But then we have different bands. So basically, if you just want to communicate, we use different type of S band or something else. But then if you want to send data, that's K band. So they work differently, independent of each other. So that's why it's a little bit different. So
Oh,
it's not something that 5G or 4G or something like that, or something like the one we actually use it. But it's kind of similar to that. But then again, it works differently. I'm not like an expert on internet on Earth, but again, it's just like we have to have some sort of architecture in design. That way, we can actually constantly stay in communication and then send data and then communicate with each other.
that's actually pretty interesting because हम ये सुनते थे पाकिस्तान में स्पेशली हम सारे लोग कि यूएस दुनिया भर से 10 साल आगे और नासा अमेरिका से भी 10 साल आगे एंड आई फील इट्स ट्रू एज वेल because you are saying na, we are that the company that NASA is working on first of all on Artemis, like on going to moon, on going to Mars. But at the same time, it's not about just going to moon and Mars only. They're also working on how to establish life there, how to make it livable place for the humans, and for that they're also working side by side, like building a communication architecture. I am really curious to know like what, because communication is the prime need to make a living at any place. But besides communication, there are other things as well. So, on what those things you are working on right now? Like NASA is working on that you can see, and in which of them you have a role?
Uh, right now, again, that was while ago when I worked on this. उस वक्त I think इतनी ज़्यादा funding नहीं थी, but I actually had the opportunity to work on those missions. So you mentioned about communication and science communication. So science communication, if I understand correctly, it's outreach and research sort of thing. So NASA उस पे हर वक्त always doing something about it, and there are many scientists. So it's a huge opportunity for actually scientists to do something. So basically, we're going to the moon, and then we can actually, if you write a paper or something, if you propose something, ke, agar hum moon pe ja rahe hain, we can do some sort of like an experiment. So you can always, write a paper on that, and then work with, professors or maybe a principal investigator. And then if it gets accepted, your project will actually go to the moon, and they will test different things. So it's actually opening up opportunities for a lot of scientists as well, in terms of if they want to do something with the science. Because आज से पहले हम लोगों ने lander भेजे हैं, but then in lander you can only have like one of your instruments, right? But then when you have humans living on the moon, you can do much, much, much more. It's the same thing that International Space Station, when astronauts go to International Space Station, they do a lot of experiments in the background. Believe it or not, कितने medical experiments वो भी हो रहे होते हैं. Astronauts are trained to do a lot of scientific experiments, so they just don't go there and live there. उनका पूरी जो timeline होती है वो experiment से भरी होती है. So they have to do a lot of these experiments when they're actually on ISS. So they're probably going to be doing something similar. We had a gateway mission, so basically it was just like International Space Station. Lekin instead of that, recently NASA administrator ने announced किया है कि using that same architecture and same modules, we'll just build it on the moon. So rather than staying in space, people will actually live there. So that's why it's a huge opportunity for a lot of people in terms of what they're going to do, in terms of experiments. Maybe they will find something that couldn't find for many years, or again, it all depends on scientists, what they want to do. So that's why I think we're living in Artemis era. So we have more opportunities than the Apollo mission. So we can actually do a lot of these things, especially for scientists around the world. I think you heard about Artemis Accord, जिसमें काफ़ी ज़्यादा जो different countries हैं उन्होंने sign किया हुआ है. Unfortunately, Pakistan is not part of it, but then उसके अलावा दूसरी जो countries हैं उनके आपस में agreements हुए हुए हैं. So that means those countries can actually probably participate, in these type of scientific research as well. So yeah, it's actually, in terms of science, it's growing. There's going to be a lot of these opportunities, and I'm hoping that after the Artemis 2 mission, now for the Artemis 3 missions by next year, you'll probably hear a lot of other things, regarding Artemis now. So again, it's just the beginning. So there's going to be many more missions.
There are Artemis, maybe there are series of like missions, right? Artemis 1, Artemis 2, Artemis 2 के अभी हाल में astronauts land करे थे, right? Last Friday, I think.
आर्टेमिस टू ने लैंड नहीं किया, लेकिन उन्होंने उसके चांद के गिर चक्कर लगा के वापस आया. तो द यूनिक थिंग अबाउट आर्टेमिस टू वाज कि उन्होंने जो ओरायन कैप्सूल था, दे नीडेड टू टेस्ट इट आउट. उसके सारे फंक्शनैलिटी, उसकी जितनी भी चीज़ें थी, वो सारा एक एक इट वाज लाइक अ टेस्ट फ्लाइट. सो नॉर्मली ये होता था कि जब अपोलो मिशन के एस्ट्रोनॉट्स जब वो मून पे जाते थे, दे वर रियली रियली क्लोज टू मून. So they could only see like above, little bit above equator, लेकिन उनको पोल्स नजर नहीं थे आ सकते. But this time जब astronauts मून के गिर चक्कर लगा कर आए हैं, वो थोड़ा they were further away from the moon, so they could actually see the poles, both poles. So that's why it was a unique experience. So इसीलिए I think they had cameras, they took a lot of pictures, and have you seen? I'm sure you've seen those beautiful pictures as well. So that's why it was a little bit different. I think Artemis third will be something where they will try to test technology, जो कि HLS, जो human learning services, जो I think they're going to test it in low Earth orbit. फिर उसके बाद, once we test that in Artemis 4, I believe we will send like some landers, और जो landers वहाँ जाएंगे, उनके अंदर already instruments होंगे. So for instance, there's one instrument that would actually, as soon as you land on moon surface, it would actually check the soil, उसकी different compositions, which इस तरह की जो चीज़ें होती हैं उसको test करना शुरू कर देगा. And then recently, my good friend and my old boss actually were as a project manager working on this Artemis module. It's part of Artemis mission, but it's like a project कि जब astronauts वहाँ जाएंगे, they would actually just bury some sort of like an instrument there. If there is any, जिस तरह earthquake होता है, वहाँ पे seismic activity या कुछ ऐसी कोई चीज़ होगी, so they can actually detect that as well. So you see, they're testing, different. There's going to be, I just mentioned two, but इसके अलावा काफी ज़्यादा जितने भी experiments जो हैं कि वो actually they will be performing that on the moon.
Okay, that I like कि it's not like कि NASA सारी चीजें खुद कर रहा हो, but it gives opportunity to everyone कि वो contribute करें, and if they find it fruitful, तो they give a room to the person कि वो आके आप लोगों के साथ मिलके एक्सपेरिमेंट करे, फर्दर चीजों पे काम करे और निकाले कि what can be done further. That's a
Right.
pretty cool thing. But since I feel that NASA की जो approach होती है बड़ी long term approach होती है, like जो चीज बनानी है वो आगे भी काम आए. So like what the communication architecture on which you have worked, I am really curious to understand how it can be used on Mars and how it needs to be enhanced for the Mars.
Yeah, so जो communication architecture है, even though कि वो भी start हो रहा है, लेकिन उससे पहले many years ago they were already testing different type of techniques. Rather than radio waves, they were using like lasers. So उन्होंने चांद पे भेज के काफी ज़्यादा ये already experiments जो हैं वो किए हुए हैं. So there were many other small missions जो कि already वो इन चीज़ों को improve कर रहे हैं. So once we know more, how can we actually just have like can establish a good communication here on moon, then we can actually just do that on the Mars as well. A problem Mars पे ये है कि it's far away from Earth. So anytime an astronaut या कोई if they're living on International Space Station, जब भी उन्हें कोई procedure या कोई चीज़ run करनी होती है, they always communicate with the Houston mission control first, and then they get the instruction and they do it. Lekin going to the Mars, it's going to be something that you have to make decisions on your own, autonomously. So they want to make sure कि even कि communication यहाँ पे हम लोग test कर रहे हैं, लेकिन when you go to the Mars, people might be like on the other side of the Mars or maybe doing some work, so they could actually communicate better. But at the same time, somehow we have like a fastest communication through Mars to Earth as well. So there, like I said, many other things, many other techniques that they're actually already testing. फिर उसके बाद, once we know more, then we can actually go to Mars. So that's why I mentioned earlier कि moon is like our playground. So उसमें जितनी भी चीजें और testing हम लोगों ने जितनी भी करनी है, we can perform that now, and then afterwards when we go to Mars, we should have like a really nice architecture, not just that but technology, So it would be more beneficial for astronauts where they have the autonomy to make decisions rather than contacting Earth. So they could actually, communicate all, send the data, everything. So that's why, again, we'll be testing more technology. We'll be doing some, more things as well. Everything is in early stages right now. So,
Okay.
maybe plan might change. Maybe they can actually come up with even better design. Sometimes you know that when you're working on something and then you find out that it's not going to work, there might be another solution, there might be a different technology, then you start working on different things. But you only find out when you're actually testing those things. So it's not always perfect. लेकिन उसके बाद अगर कोई problem face करते हैं तो then you figure out, okay, we can actually fix it. So we want to make sure कि ये सारी जितनी भी problems है, जितना कुछ हम लोगों ने test करना है, actually वो ज़्यादा हमारे लिए beneficial हो जब हम लोग मार्स पे जाएं. So again, it's going to take, in my personal opinion, quite some time to actually when we're really ready to go to Mars.
So, as हमारी जो अभी तक की discussion हुई, in which you have discussed about technologies, right? Different technologies are utilized on for Artemis project on Moon, and Moon is basically experimental ground, जिस पे जो चीजें टेस्ट की जाएंगी वो further आगे लेके जाएंगी. But I'm really curious to understand कि how from Moon you can go to Mars, and what's the motive behind going to Mars?
Curiosity, I guess. हर एक को curiosity होती है कि हम लोगों ने कहीं दूर जाना है, ये करना है, वो करना है. So Mars is closer to Earth. As you heard that, many times, again, I'm not a scientist, and scientists already, said that, there was a time that there were, Mars had water, and then, it has like atmosphere like like Earth. So that's why they want to go there and then explore more. So you never know, अगर हम लोग मार्स पे जाएं उसके बाद हम लोग कहीं और भी जा सकते हैं उसके अलावा, different planets or different places. So it's always about curiosity, I guess. जितनी भी आज तक टेक्नोलॉजीज या चीज़ें जो हम लोगों ने डेवलप की है, it's all because, we're as human beings, we're very curious about a lot of things, right? So इसीलिए, so again, we're explorer as well at the same time. So why not just do this? So that's the reason I think, a lot of people, they want to go to Mars is because of that. But then you have scientific, kind of like benefits, of going to the Mars as well. You can actually learn more about the architecture, in terms of, okay, how we can actually test, many other technologies when it's actually really far. Scientists can actually, especially geologists or planetary scientists, can actually see, okay, whether there was a water there, or how Mars was formed, how it's actually connected to Earth. Maybe find like some sort of like more similarities and something like that. And who knows, we might find aliens as well. I'm just kidding. So these are the things that, kind of, makes curious, इंसान को ज़्यादा curious बनाते हैं इन चीज़ों के लिए कि, why we want to go there. And then plus it's just, it's far, but it's not that far if you compare to other planets. So why not?
I really want to understand this thing, since different kinds of tools, different kinds of technology, different kinds of materials would be utilized to go there and to craft everything. So, how's that technology is different, and how it creates job opportunities, and especially sort of working opportunities for South Asians, for youngsters, for newbies.
Oh, nowadays you heard like, there's a lot of 3D modelings, right? You can actually do a lot of these things, and then you can actually even build houses with 3D modeling, right? So there are many companies that are testing these type of technologies on Earth, and then they want to test it on the moon. Or अगर ये चीजें moon पे, if we test those technologies, actually, if we make like a house or habitable place where we could actually just, live there, then you can actually try same thing going to Mars as well. It costs a lot of money to actually build something on the ground on Earth and then send it to moon. So rather than doing that, if we could just utilize what we have on moon, so basically to understand, what's available there, फिर इसके बाद, use like 3D techniques or 3D modeling techniques, and then maybe build something, by just using those resources, that would definitely help us, go into the Mars as well. So that's why, again, it's a huge opportunity for younger generation, different companies. So they can come up with different models. They can come up with different techniques. Maybe they might get selected to actually perform these type of technologies on the moon. So you never know. But yeah, again, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of technology is going to be tested on the moon. So if you have something, or maybe you think about something like that might be helpful, you can just kind of write a paper, work with the PI, and then maybe start building that technology on the ground. I mean, on Earth, and then see if it can actually be utilized on Moon. But problem is कि अगेन ज़्यादातर आई बिलीव कि जो आर्टेमिस अकॉर्ड है, जितनी भी कंट्रीज जिन्होंने इनको साइन किया हुआ है, कोड को साइन किया हुआ है, उनको ज़्यादा बेसिकली facilitate करेंगे rather than other countries. So then that's why, especially people working in Asia, I think there are a couple of Asian countries that actually signed the accord as well. But in terms of, in my opinion, कि अगर कोई पाकिस्तान से है या different countries जिन्होंने accord sign नहीं किया हुआ, they can always actually work with other universities, or other agencies as a third party or something. And then there are many ways they can actually sort of like contribute as well. But there are, like I said, space is growing. There will be more chances, and if you have something, definitely, if you talk to PIs, or if you talk to any of the companies, or even write a paper or even an article, who knows, you might get selected for that kind of stuff as well.
I totally agree with you. The world is full of opportunities, and we should think out of the box. So, since you said it yourself that space is growing, and today we have a lot of organizations, third-party organizations भी हैं, research centers भी हैं, plus हमारे पास NASA के अलावा और भी बहुत सारी organizations हैं, if I'm not wrong. So, I just want to understand that a Pakistani student, a South Asian student, जिसके पास अपने मुल्क में अपॉर्चुनिटीज कम होती हैं, जैसे लेट्स सपोज आई विल गिव एन एग्जांपल ऑफ माय फ्रेंड who studied space sciences, and space sciences में भी इसने स्पेशलाइजेशन इसी तरफ किया था, आपकी एस्ट्रोनॉटिकल साइंसेज में. But because of having very limited opportunities in this industry, especially in Pakistan, so just that affected his whole income as well. Because at the end of the day, you have to pay bills. So
Right.
eventually, he had to move into cybersecurity. So, what a person, a Pakistani can do to cultivate what he has studied, what she has studied, and make the room for herself or himself in the world of space sciences?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In my personal opinion, universities of Pakistan में जितनी भी हैं, if they're actually teaching space sciences, they should teach them tools. They should teach them techniques. Some sort of they should help their students to actually create opportunities for them. But let's just say कि कुछ universities, they might not have any opportunities, but if you do your bachelor's, then I think the best way would be you have to pursue your master's and PhD. PhD is actually a must in again, my opinion, if you want to do something, if you want to contribute, in terms of astronomy or astrophysics. So for that, you can actually go to many universities, around the world. And then again, as you mentioned, it's not just NASA, but there are many other entities as well. There's ESA. There are many other private organizations as well. ESA is actually comprised of a lot of other countries, so you can always contribute something. So give you an example कि मेरा जो Tigris mission है, उसमें there is this person who actually came from India. She's basically not a US citizen, लेकिन she's actually supporting NASA mission. Actually, my mission, the Tigris one, because she had this background. She did postgrad in that particle physics subject. So she had experience working with CERN. लेकिन somehow उसका जो experience है matched, with our project. So 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 she's actually kind of supporting that right now, even though she's not, civil servant. She's not U.S. citizen. But at the same time, there are many opportunities. Even if you're not U.S. citizen, you can go through your PI, principal investigator, if you actually kind of or any other company or maybe organization work certain projects. Somehow you can get involved, so you can actually contribute towards those missions. But the thing is, like, it's very competitive, so you have to really study hard. So it's not something, I would just get an education and then somehow I'll end up working, in that field. So again, I'm an engineer, and my background is in engineering, but in someone who has more experience working in astrophysics or that kind of academic level, they can actually probably explain more. But in my understanding is that when you actually pursue your PhD, you have to pick a topic that is actually basically seen that might be useful for future studies or maybe future experiments or something like that. So it's not something that जो अच्छा लगा मैंने pick कर लिया. फिर उसके बाद you have to really work hard on that subject as well, because if you're pursuing for PhD, you're gonna you have to spend all the time doing that kind of work. So ये साथ में इसके अलावा you have to be you have to have a lot of patience because it takes a lot of times to get there. The PhD OT, as you know, it takes like more than like 6 years, right? And then there's a postgrad. So it's a commitment itself. So it's not something that, you would actually just, get your degree and then you get you'll get your job right away. So basically, I think because these opportunities are not available in Pakistan, they probably don't even have tools to actually pursue higher education. So it becomes harder for a person to actually pursue something towards space sciences, and that's why a lot of people they switch in terms of different areas in for job. Like if they have, as you mentioned, degree in astrophysics, but they're doing cybersecurity because again they have to actually feed their family, right? So they need to pay their bills. So that's why it becomes really harder as well. Not just in Pakistan, actually here as well. Sometimes you might not get an opportunity, then you change your career to something else. So it's sort of common, but not that common.
Little bit everywhere, not only in Pakistan, that people have to change their fields at times when, especially, they have a lot of things
Yeah,
on the.
yeah,
But since we are about to end the show, and I really very like amazed to see your journey, that how you started from Pakistan and then moved to America, and from there you went into NASA. So based on, and you nothing achieved was in a day, right? You spent years to get that. So, based on your experience, based on your journey, and based on what you have seen in Pakistan, based on how Pakistanis are going right now, what advice you have for Pakistanis, especially students who are in space sciences, who are in astronautical sciences?
yeah. So I was really amazed कि पाकिस्तान में जो है ना ये space study का जो trend है ना it's actually increasing. A lot of people are interested in studying space sciences. I had the opportunity to actually give a lecture at presentation at LUMS and NUST and Qaid Azam University, and I saw a lot of people actually, they really want to do something in terms of space science, but unfortunately, they don't have any opportunities. कुछ लोग जो हैं वो अपना मेजर चेंज कर लेते हैं. I've talked to a couple of students just mentioned, और कुछ लोग जो हैं वो उनकी complaints ये होती है कि basically you're teaching the degree is actually in astrophysics, but they're teaching more like electronic courses or electrical courses जिसका इतना direct relationship उसके साथ नहीं है. And then if there is a tool that they can actually use to do something, then the professors they just won't give them like better opportunity to learn that tool. सिर्फ उनको थोड़ा सा दिखा दिया and that's about it. ये चीज़ें यहाँ यूएस में नहीं है. यूएस में ज़्यादातर जितने भी professors होते हैं, they give you free hand. They actually ask you to do your research. They give you more opportunities. किसी भी time आप जाओ उनके पास professors के पास, they tend to help you a lot. So I would say कि students को कि वो discourage ना हो इन चीज़ों से, just do your best. But at the same time, if you don't find any opportunities in Pakistan, you can always pursue something, in Europe or other countries as well, even in North America, and then learn everything and then maybe go back to Pakistan and then try to help students there as well. Maybe create your own opportunities in Pakistan. Maybe create something that that would be helpful for students as well. So you can do that as well. And if you really don't want to do it, you can also contribute towards we mentioned about Artemis program. उसके अलावा भी काफ़ी ज़्यादा different किस्म की sciences हैं. Like there is a solar science. You can actually kind of support something towards that. Astronomy के अलावा और भी earth science भी है. We always talk about astronomy, but then earth actually needs more care too. So इस तरह की जो चीज़ें, you can do a lot of these things. But उसके लिए मेहनत करनी पड़ती है. It's not something that कि मैंने डिग्री ले ली और मेरे ग्रेड्स अच्छे हैं तो मुझे सब कुछ मिल जाएगा. It's nothing. It's not like that. जो रियलिटी है वो ये है कि what do you bring to the table? जब आपका इंटरव्यू होता है, I've seen it कि they don't look at कि आप किसी prestigious university से आए हो या आपके ये GPA हैं. They want to know कि आप हमारे लिए क्या कर सकते हो. What's the different thing that make you stand out from other applicants? So आपको you have to study hard. You have to do something different. So again, competition बहुत ज़्यादा है. So even at NASA, when you're applying for civil servant jobs, काफ़ी thousands of people actually apply, पर उनमें से selection सिर्फ चंद लोगों की होती है because they again उनकी selection criteria is very different. But it all depends on कि how unique you are. Like अगर आपके पास same experience है जो हर एक के पास है, तो it gets harder to actually get the position. So do something unique, do projects while you're in college or university rather than spending time, I would say, on social media or something. Just now we have AI, right? So it can really, really assist you. Look at the problems in your field. जो कि लोग trying to, they're trying to tackle, different type of situations, different type of problems. Try to work on it. It's not like you're finding a solution. Just do something about it. And then when you're actually applying for your master's program, your PhD programs, or even job, you can show that work that you actually are curious about these things and you're working towards that. So again, मेहनत करनी पड़ेगी. उसके अलावा और कुछ भी नहीं है. And I guess being a Muslim, अल्लाह पे भरोसा रखो, and then रास्ते सारे आसान होती हो जाएंगे.
Much Yasir for the greatest advice. And love the advice कि अल्लाह पे भरोसा रखना होगा, and love that part that you can cultivate things yourself as well and bring it back to Pakistan. I love these words the most. But it was great to meet you, great to ask you a lot of things. There's one more thing I want to ask, like we all use AI a lot, right? But I really want to understand, and in political scenarios, AI has been in use a lot nowadays. I want to know how much AI is in use at NASA as well.
We started to implement AI now, and we have our own versions because since we have a lot of stuff, because of the complexity, and we have ITAR restrictions because उनमें कुछ ऐसी sensitive चीज़ें होती हैं जो कि you cannot put it in chat GPT or something like that, right? So इसके लिए they had to come up with their own version of AI. Uh, I don't know anything about on the science perspective. Maybe they're using it a lot, but जो मेरा exposure जितना भी हुआ है, we have our own AI chat GPT version, but I only just use it for tedious work, जो कि just small sort of like work that actually takes a lot of hours to do. छोटे छोटे जिस तरह task होते हैं, maybe a budgeting task or something like that. So I would actually just use it for that, but nothing in terms of making decisions. So I think it's evolving right now. But then, if I remember correctly, I mean, AI has actually been around for many years, but we just started using this term. So we had different tools like AIs in our space industry that kind of analyze the data and then kind of make recommendations. So they use it all the time. But now we have different platforms and people actually use it every day. So I see that maybe in future, next years, we might be relying more on AI, but in terms of space missions, if I have to send a satellite or अगर मैंने satellite भेजनी है उसको सिर्फ करूँ, ऐसा अभी नहीं हो सकता. Maybe we could do some analysis work or something, but you still need you still need decision in terms of if there is an anomaly or something happens. So maybe in few years we'll see, but I think gradually we're kind of progressing towards that. And I'm sure in cloud computing or on the scientist, on the
So while advising, you talked about AI, and I'm really curious to know, okay, since AI has been in use a lot, especially it's used in political matters as well, in our daily lives as well. So I'm really curious to know, okay, how much it's in use in NASA as well.
So at NASA, I think Similar to AI tools, we've been using it for many years. For instance, अगर कोई analysis type of काम करना हो तो उससे कुछ इस तरह की चीज़ें लेनी हो तो उसके लिए जो AI के tools हैं वो हम लोग पहले utilize कर रहे थे. लेकिन जिस तरह अभी चैट जीपीटी है इस तरह के जो टूल्स हैं we hardly use that. NASA Goddard actually started an initiative. उन्होंने अपना एक NASA का जो अपने कोई इस तरह चैट जीपीटी की तरह का टूल्स है वो उन्होंने भी बिल्ड किया है. But that's just for doing like a tedious type of work जिसमें documentation या फिर आप कह दो कि कोई बजटिंग या इस तरह की जो कैलकुलेशन जो कि बहुत ज़्यादा टाइम लेती है तो उसको मिनिमाइज करने के लिए. लेकिन I don't have a lot of exposure in AI. I'm sure from science perspective, scientists जो हैं, they might be using a lot of AI tools, to do different type of work. But लेकिन मैंने इतना ज़्यादा जो है ना उसके बारे में अभी फ़िलहाल इतना देखा नहीं है. Like I said, कि we have tools that we actually kind of use similar to AI. But yeah, I see that in future they might be actually using a lot of these tools. उसको use that to their advantage. किसी तरह से उसको टेलर करके जो कि हमारी जो कुछ चीज़ें हों जो हमारी नीड्स होती हैं या जो कुछ भी इस तरह की कोई अगर कैलकुलेशंस हैं टीडियस किस्म का जो काम है उसको इम्प्लीमेंट करने के लिए इस तरह की जो चीज़ें हैं वो डेफिनेटली I see that in future we might be using that a lot. But for now, me personally, I'm not really using it much. Or यहाँ पे restrictions भी होती हैं because you can't just input anything into public chat GPT because कुछ data जो होता है वो काफ़ी sensitive होता है. So you don't want to actually just kind of do that. You don't want to actually put that data into chat GPT. So इसीलिए you have to be very careful when you're using these type of tools.
It's definitely true because AI में जो आप डालते हो, it's for public ना, and I totally agree with this. But thank you so much, Yasir, for being there, for taking out time for all of us, and for sharing your experiences and advising